Hey everybody, this is Garrett with Earth and Time, a channel where we explore both human history as well as Earth history and where the two actually intersect. And today, in celebration of the 250th anniversary of the United States of America, I'm coming to you from Boston, a very snowy Boston as you can see behind me. But what I want to take you all to do today is actually walk the Freedom Trail, a trail that takes us through the early history of Boston, but not just the early history of Boston, but takes us to such places as where the Boston Massacre was and Bunker Hill, as well as some of the Paul Revere sites that all of us learned about back in grade school. So come join me today, come check out Boston with me and check out the Freedom Trail. Let's get to it. Starting from the Visitor Center here in Boston Commons, we're going to start on the Boston Freedom Trail, and they have red lines, in this case red brick, that we get to follow the whole way around the city for approximately 2.5 miles. Welcome to Boston Commons, actually America's oldest park, and it's here in the central part of Boston. And as we can see, the Boston Freedom Trail runs right through it towards where we're going there with the Gold Dome building, the State House. And if you can hear in the background, they actually have a church ringing its bells right now. Not only is it the center of the community here in Boston, it also ended up being a very important historic place where a number of things happen here, from hanging pirates to even witches and witch trials, to this is where the British would get together and march when they occupied this city pre-Revolutionary War time. So as I work my way along this trail, it's worth noting that not only was this a very important historic place before the time of the Revolution, during the time of the Revolution, but even more modern days. So individuals like Martin Luther King spoke here. We also had a mass here by Pope John Paul II. And for those of you familiar with the movie Glory, a fantastic Civil War movie, this is actually a memorial to the 54th Regiment, which the movie Glory follows. Here's the other side of that memorial. In fact, I think this is actually featured within the movie. The second stop on the Freedom Trail here is actually the Massachusetts State House, which was completed January 11th, 1798. The dome on top actually once upon a time was made out of wood and was later covered by copper by none other than Paul Revere. The gold on top wasn't put in until 1874, but it's become a marker and, if you will, a trademark of Massachusetts State House. So the State House back here, or the capital for Massachusetts, was originally on land owned by John Hancock, and I thought that was really interesting. Not only did Paul Revere do the original copper coating where you see the gold today, but this was actually all John Hancock's land, and he would graze cows on it. And the State House is open today, so let's go see if we can take a quick tour inside. If you look up, we can see the name John Hancock there. Joseph Warren, these are the individuals who worked on the State House. On the other side, you have James Otis, and then you have, I zoom way up there, Sam Adams. The Civil War Memorial. And taking a look at Memorial Hall. We actually have the 54th Regiment flag, which we saw the memorial to the 54th Regimental Color Division outside, and here's their flag. Really neat to be walking in this building with so much history and so many important moments in history that took place in the state, and I'm in their Capitol building. Showing one of the earlier flags displayed. It's from 1781 during the Revolutionary War. Zoom up above, you have a picture of the Pilgrims from the Mayflower to the battle at North Bridge. First major engagement between the Americans and British happened here in Concord and Lexington, the famous Minutemen. And here is a bust of John Adams, of course, the second president of the United States, an amazing orator, and one of the founding fathers. Whole section on John Adams. And if you haven't ever watched it, the HBO series on John Adams is really, really good. I highly recommend it. Paul Giamatti is definitely one of my favorite actors. This is pretty cool. So this is to the Army nurses from 1861 to 65, and the Angels of Mercy in Life amid scenes of conflict and death, a tribute of honor and gratitude from the Massachusetts Department Daughters of Veterans, 1914. And here's a bust of John Hancock, whose gravesite we're going to see as well. And outside you can see a nice view of the sculpture we saw to the 54th Regiment and Boston Commons. Here's a nice view of the Capitol building. And one of the individuals here told me I needed to come check out the State Library. It's a library, so I'm just going to film and be quiet. And here's a plaque to commemorate the arrival on June 12, 1630 of the frigate Arbella, bringing Governor Winthrop and the charter of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Right, that was really, really cool, checking out the Capitol building here in Massachusetts, something I didn't expect to do. Now we're going to work our way down to Park Street and one of the most famous graveyards in North America. So the first few sites that we're visiting are all along or adjacent to Boston Commons. As I was walking past this building, I thought I was in New Orleans for a second. All right, our next stop here is the North Park Church, which was built in 1809, and it was actually the location where America, My Country, 'Tis of Thee by Samuel Francis Smith was first sung here on July 4th, 1831. A little bit extra trivia for you. What's interesting about this place is actually behind it at the Granary burying ground. So let's go take a look at that. It's amazing being in a city like Boston where literally every single corner seems to be steeped in history that I grew up with, and something that I didn't get experience growing up on the West Coast. Things weren't quite as historic and old unless you were at the missions there. But on my way, they actually have some stuff here on Park Street Church on the Freedom Trail. It says, on this site, the sails for the USS Constitution were sewn in the old granary buildings, which actually occupied this spot beforehand. And it says the church was constructed with a 217-foot tall steeple. It was the tallest in America until 1847. Well, unfortunately, because of all the snow, the burial ground is actually closed today. But you'll see that it was founded in 1660. And the victims of the Boston Massacre, which we're actually going to visit that site here shortly, are buried here. You have Benjamin Franklin's parents buried here. You also have Paul Revere buried here, as well as famous people like John Hancock, Samuel Adams, Robert Trait Payne, and a number of governors from the early founding of the state and the country. I really wish I could have seen Hancock's gravesite as well as Paul Revere's, so something to come back and do another time. Here's a look at the old gravesite. So it's founded in 1660. That's an old timer. Individuals buried here that we want to see. Most importantly, I want to see Sam Adams, John Hancock, and of course Paul Revere. And first one we come to, as far as the Revolutionary forefathers, is actually Samuel Adams, born 1722 and died in 1803. He was the victims of the Boston Massacre, March 5th, 1770. Really cool to see the tombs, and with the weeds in between growing and blowing, creates an extra unique ambiance. This talks about the different decorations at the top of the gravestones. So they have Death's Head, Winged Cherub, and the Willow and Urn. The Death's Head is the oldest example of the skull with the wings on it, and this one's from 1782. An idea about the different tops. So it's a different version of the skull and wings. The designs on these gravestones are just phenomenal. 1769, age 54 years. Example of one of the cherubs. That memorial to Franklin, again, not Benjamin Franklin, but his parents who lived here in Boston. And going full circle, we saw Sam Adams, and now we're seeing John Hancock's gravesite here at the Granary graveyard. Flowering plants and graveyards, from death comes life, kind of that full circle concept. So it's really neat to see the beautiful trees in bloom right now. Interesting Greek style tombs. I've seen a couple of those here. So right around us here, a bunch of the craftsmen, including Paul Revere, which we'll see behind us. There's a tour group right now, so we'll turn around and check him out. Very
There's the old tombstone.
Have you ever heard of Mr. Sam Adams?
We are once again on the Freedom Trail. All right, this is the King's Church, New England's first Anglican church. The King's Chapel has been here for 330 years, founded in 1686. That's just absolutely crazy that it was found on the site. The stones actually were put in place closer to 1754. Here's a sign about the church. King's Chapel, 1686, first permanent established Anglican church in New England. There's three prominent names that keep coming up over and over again here in Boston. Those are John Adams, the second president of the United States of America, and of course the father to John Quincy Adams, the fifth president of the United States of America. But also Paul Revere is another one. And it turns out Paul Revere made a bell that's up here in the tower and is still rung today. So this cemetery and grave site is also closed, but Winthrop is buried here, the first governor of Massachusetts, as well as one of the first settlers from the Mayflower. Really neat to see how the old tombstones were really pieces of artwork. Now, as a geologist, many of you who follow my channel know I'm a geologist. I'm really curious what these tombstones are made out of. They look like they may be some of the metamorphic rock that's out here, maybe some kind of schist or phyllite, something more durable, or maybe a dark marble. I'm not exactly sure. Right behind the church is Boston's Old City Hall. But what's fascinating about this also is I believe this is the location of the first public school in the United States. Right. I also like finding unusual history. So the first electric fire alarm system was built in 1852, and it was on this site where they did that. Huh, who knew? Probably one of the most famous landmarks in early American history, of course, along with Independence Hall, is actually this meeting house, because this meeting house is where the chant "No Tax on Tea" came from, and there was a decision on December 16, 1773, where 5,000 angry colonists gathered here and around here to protest the tax on tea, and ultimately, of course, it would lead to the Boston Tea Party. And going back to Samuel Adams, he was the individual that made the call to dump the tea into the harbor. And in fact, they're just opening up right now. Now let's go take a look inside where the Boston Tea Party began. This old diorama of the town of Boston from 1773. I apologize about the glare. We're sitting somewhere in this region right here. So on the diorama, if we look at where number 41 is, that's where the Boston Massacre took place, and our next stop on this tour. Now we're going to go to where the colonists went to and started protesting even before this at the old State House, which was the capital or the seat of government for the British in this region. It is the old State House. So this was the seat of power for the English when Massachusetts was a colony. Also meant this is where the colonists would file all their grievances, including out the front part of the old State House, where on March 5th, 1770, right out in this area is where the Boston Massacre actually took place. So this is where colonists came. They were protesting what was going on, the intolerable acts, they called them, a series of taxes that were imposed on the colonists due to the wars that Britain had had with France and other countries. Now they have a site here that says the site of the Boston Massacre. It was roughly in this area. I think the actual massacre, as I understand from reading, actually took place out in that intersection that we see today. That the Boston Massacre took place, which really set the stage for everything else that would come over the next handful of years, eventually leading to the Declaration of Independence little more than 6 years later, and which was read, I believe, from that balcony when it was published and brought to Boston. So I moved across the street from the State House, and somewhere in this area, just as another view, is where the Boston Massacre actually would have taken place, was somewhere in this intersection in front of this building. And we can see that, of course, in those images we saw before. So a big question always is, why was Boston so central to the start of the American Revolution, and why they were so important, and why the British felt like they had to contain any kind of uprisings here? And that is because Boston really was a center of trade. You can see where Boston is. Almost everything was really coming in and out here. Now you had New York and you had some other ports as well, but Boston was the most important port for North America. Our next spot is known as Faneuil Hall, and this was really where the idea of free speech really came through, and also is known as the Cradle of Liberty, because before the meeting house that we were at, before the State House, this is where the free people in the area, or the colonists, could come together and discuss what was happening and discuss what kind of changes they wanted to make. And we can actually see the hall now. So here you go. Here's Faneuil Hall, one of the original meeting houses for the early patriots, and a seat of what would become our democracy in a lot of ways. And here's a sign about the hall. This is Faneuil Hall, the Cradle of Liberty, built and given to the town of Boston by Peter Faneuil, 1742, still used by a free people until 1930. And in front of it was one of the most prominent individuals who had voiced their opinions, and that was Samuel Adams. Building here was built in 1741, and of course, as I mentioned before, it became the seat of where a colonist or a local merchant or local person here could come and dissent or complain or file grievances against what was going on with the royal oppression during that time. Is Quincy Market, where we're going to go grab some lunch together. All right, I grabbed some quick lunch over at Quincy Market. Had a lobster roll. It was okay. I did a hot lobster roll. I wasn't super impressed by it, but it was okay. And then I had some clam chowder. That was okay as well. Nothing I was super impressed by. I've definitely had better, but it's a good place to stop and at least get some food along the trail. So as I work my way down the streets here, you definitely get the old Boston feel on this stretch. Really, really neat architecture. And here's a ye old onion. Oh, actually, I heard this place is really good, the Oyster House. Maybe should wait to eat there. And here's the Bell in Hand Tavern, which is the old town crier would have been here. And I'm just gonna veer down this way. A little cobblestone street to walk down, still with the Freedom Trail stripe on it, but it really gives you an idea about what old Boston would have looked like. These uneven cobblestone streets. And this idea of the point from 1630, although we know that wasn't how long that place has been here. Oh, there's Dirty Nelly's. Sounds like a fun Irish bar down there. As I'm walking through here, I just wanted to get a shot of the skyline here for you all of Boston while I have an open space in front of me. This little greenway here as I crossed over a river and into a very old looking part of Boston. I guess this is the north end where all the famous Italian places are and other fantastic restaurants. So let's go check it out. There's a statue of Tony DeMarco, the Flame and Fury of Fleet Street. Famous boxer from the last century. Definitely say there's been a distinct change in the architectural style from where I started this tour to where I'm at now. Check out the old buildings. I love old buildings. Decided to take a turn just to explore a little bit and check out the charm of these back alleys and streets. So I'm working over to the Paul Revere house, which you actually can see right behind me right now. So that's Paul Revere's house over my shoulder there. And of course, Paul Revere made famous for Paul Revere's Ride, which he actually wasn't as famous for until much later due to a poem. Let's go see if we can take a quick tour of Paul Revere's house. All right, so I can show you the outside of the home, but it says there's no photography or video inside. So what I'll do is I'll go through it and I'll do my best to describe what I see inside of Paul Revere's home. All right, so went through the Paul Revere house. It's interesting. It's very much like I've seen in places like Colonial Williamsburg, that style of furniture. What blew me away is he had 16 children. That I didn't know. And for a smaller house, although this would have been a really nice house, a merchant class house, an upper merchant class house, that's a lot of kids to fit in that house through time. So they basically had a full house their whole lives. You can see that map here where Paul Revere was the red line, worked his way across up here warned Hancock and Adams, and then Dawes actually went and continued on as well. Probably the reason Paul Revere is so famous is because of Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's Paul Revere's Ride poem that obviously came out much later, but it was this famous poem that really put Paul Revere in the light and made him a national hero. Now, with following in Paul Revere's footsteps, we're on to the North Church. One of the most photographed spots in all of Boston is of this Paul Revere statue with the North Church in the background. Of course, the North Church is where they hung or put up the 2 lanterns to let the colonists in Charlestown know that the British regulars were coming by sea, not by land. If we all remember, one if by land, which is where they would have taken a causeway south out of Boston, or 2 if by sea, which is the way the British regulars went to cross over into Charleston and march up to Lexington and Concord. And even on the front of the church, they have a reference there to the signal lanterns of Paul Revere displayed in the steeple of this church, April 18th, 1775, warned the country of the march of the British troops to Lexington and Concord. So I'll mention why I'm here on Copp's Hill and I'm working my way down the hills. These hills are mostly the result of ancient glacial activities. Back during the last ice maxima, they had sheets of ice that worked their way all the way down here, and they did that multiple times. So all these hills that I'm sitting on top of, which also became very important for the Revolutionary War, specifically Bunker Hill, which we'll visit later on, is one of these, are what are known as drumlins. In fact, you can see the Bunker Hill Memorial over there for the Battle of Bunker Hill, which took place after Lexington and Concord. So as I'm walking down hills like this here in Boston, I'm actually walking down what are old drumlins or old glacial deposits from when those glaciers came through and scoured a bunch of material. All right, so I hot-footed across from Copp's Hill, and now I'm at the USS Constitution. Although not related to the Revolutionary War, it was very important as far as the independence from Britain, because of course the second war for independence was the War of 1812, and we're going to check out USS Constitution, or what is known as Old Ironsides. I've actually never seen a shipyard before, so this is really fascinating. I've never seen a dry dock before, but I know still today, of course, ships need to go into dry dock to get repaired, and that could be a cruise ship, that could be naval ships. Now they do have a destroyer from World War II. It's actually a Fletcher class destroyer. My grandfather actually served on a Gleaves class destroyer. The Fletcher class destroyer, interesting enough, you ever saw the movie Greyhound with Tom Hanks? It's actually they filmed a lot of it on USS Kidd, which is in Baton Rouge, and that would be a Fletcher class destroyer as well. And this one actually served in the Pacific Theater, which I'm really bummed it's closed for the season. I would love to have taken a tour. All right, and there she is, Old Ironsides herself. Something I've read about since I was a kid, from, of course, history books, learning about the War of 1812. It's always a ship that's mentioned. The British Navy was known as the most formidable Navy at that time, and actually Old Ironsides went up against the HMS Revere and actually defeated her. And this was thought of as almost an unthinkable event for an American ship to defeat a British ship. And of course, it actually ended up being 33-0 by the end of its career. Just a little trivia for you. The USS Constitution is the oldest commissioned warship afloat in the world. So she's still owned and actually has a naval contingent on her to this day. This is cool. This is some old timber from the USS Constitution. All right, super excited to get on board. So if I stand here and I pan around, you'll get an idea of just how big. This is a pretty formidable ship, I'll tell you what. That was actually used for light for the captain and extra air. And this is the spot where they would have actually had the wheel, but they have it down today for restoration because of the weather. Down into the bells, went down. Ooh. Captain's quarters. Pretty nice quarters in here. Of course, where they had meetings. Oh. love the old lamps up here too. There's the memorial to everybody who served on the USS Constitution. Is passed now. Pumps, so if they started flooding, they can pump water from the lower decks.
To destroy the mats, which are the 3 poles that you see.
They had a ration of grog or alcohol. In New St. it was 2 pints per sailor, and little butts where they got water out of, and it was 1 gallon per sailor. Ended up with 250 sailors on here sleeping in shifts. And you'd have what you called your messmates, which was a group of about 12 individuals that would be who you'd partner with, who you'd eat with, and who you'd probably run your guns with or your duties with. I'll say it was very low quarters. I can't imagine how many times these guys must have hit their heads. There's a look inside of a cabin of a lieutenant.
That's why I described it, because unfortunately, the ship would be closing at 5. That would have been under there, would have been the youngest sailors on board the ship, which were 8 years old.
Pretty cool to be staying on old Ironsides here, knowing the history. The tour was fascinating. I just can't imagine 250 people on one ship. You would hope you'd have some duties here topside so you can get some air, because the deeper down you went, the more confined it was and more snug. Really, really cool to take a tour of this. I want to say thank you to the docent who did a great job as well. So on to our next stop from the USS Constitution. Let's go take a look at Bunker Hill. See the section where we were actually walking down on the gun deck there. I can see our next stop in the distance over there. All right, here we go. I've got to say that was a pleasant surprise. I was really excited I got a chance to tour the USS Constitution with you all and learn a little bit more about this naval shipyard. Like I said earlier, I've never been to a naval shipyard before, and of course it's so important to the history of our country, and for me personally, because my grandfather served in the Navy through World War II, also very important and close to my heart. The sun gets low in the sky. I'm walking the Freedom Trail marker through the old naval shipyard. All right, I love this. This is exactly what I thought Boston would look like. Narrow sidewalks, brick buildings, black shutters on the windows, and I'm working up another drumlin. So working up another one of these glacial hill deposits to get on top of where the Bunker Hill Memorial is. Now, what I'm confused by, maybe we'll get the answers. They call it the Battle of Bunker Hill, but are we actually on Breed's Hill as I'm walking up this slope right now? I have to pan and show. There's a row of houses here. Again, this is what I think of when I think of pictures of New England or Boston. So as I work my way up the hill here the American soldiers killed June 17th, 1775 here at the Battle of Bunker Hill. Bottom here, the American troops engaged numbered 1,500 and their loss was 140 killed, 271 wounded, 30 prisoners. The British forces exceeded 2,000, of which 35 officers and 191 rank and file were killed, 122 officers and 706 rank and file were wounded. The American troops were mainly from Massachusetts, bravely assisted by 2 regiments from New Hampshire and a small force from Connecticut. Prescott and Putnam shared the honors of the day. All right, my friends, we've made it to the memorial on Bunker Hill. All right, so they actually have a Bunker Hill Museum here, and I'm gonna go check that out real quick before going over to the memorial. Now, one thing I did learn is that Bunker Hill is what the locals called kind of both the hills. There are actually 2 hills here, but Breed's Hill is actually where the battle took place. So, displayed overhead is a contemporary reproduction of Battle of Bunker Hill cyclorama. The battle going on. Militia were on top of fortifications on top of Breed's Hill or Bunker Hill here, and you'll see they kept fighting again and again, wave after wave of British regulars and Marines, and eventually they broke through and it ended up being hand-to-hand combat. And of course the British Marines actually and the regulars had bayonets and more sabers and were trained for hand-to-hand combat. The militia here were not, so they ended up swinging their rifles at clubs, using their knives, whatever they had, tomahawks, to use in this battle. It was considered a very bloody battle and actually changed how the British would approach the war and even the Americans. Example of that, so you can see the Americans had the high ground And eventually the British realized, and the Americans realized, that having the high ground was going to be key to controlling areas, and nobody really wanted to storm the high ground after this initial battle, because the British, although they won the day in the sense that they took the hill, there were such mounting losses from the battle that they actually ended up really losing in a lot of ways, because they lost so many soldiers and so many officers. So this battle, by the way, took place June 17th, 1775. You can see where the American militia set up a redoubt, or a little fort, on top of the hill. And you get an idea about the lines and lines of British troops coming. You can get an idea here. Here are the different hills. So there are really 3 hills. I don't know what this one is called. This was Breed's, and this was Bunker proper. But the battle really took place on top of Breed's Hill, and eventually the militia had to retreat across. You'll see they have these little land bridges. So much of Boston, different from today from before, Boston really was only connected to the mainland. It was basically an island, or it was like an island. They had a bridge, causeway going to the mainland. They had a row to get across. And you'll see all the ships coming across here to get onto the island, or onto the mainland of Charleston, and you can see the other causeway. And Paul Revere's riot occurred, they said 1 if by land, so that would be going the causeway, the British troops marching to Lexington, or 2 if by sea, that's coming across here to Charleston, and it turned out it was 2 if by sea, the famous story. But this gives you an idea why they had to talk about that, and really why the British also went this way. It was faster probably to ferry troops across and march them through here to Lexington than it was to have them march down towards the south and up and around to Lexington. Where I was talking about with the British, they had bayonets and they were trained to use them. Many of the Americans didn't have any kind of hand-to-hand combat training like that, and or didn't have anything like a musket that would give them that distance. They may have knives or hatchets. Nathaniel Greene's quote, "I wish we could sell them another hill at the same price." Now, of course, one of the most famous sayings, military history came out of this, and that was, "Don't fire until they see the whites of their eyes," which was the call to the patriotic soldiers to not fire until the British troops were close enough to make every shot count. So under this is actually a British drum that was taken at the battle, and I don't know how well you can see it, but that's really, really cool. Let's actually go check out the actual memorial now. And we've made it all the way to the end of the Freedom Trail. We've worked our way from the Boston Commons, went through the Massachusetts State House, worked our way through much of Boston to the north end, where we saw Paul Revere's house, the Old North Church, the Copp's Hills ground, worked our way across the bridge here, saw the USS Constitution, ending here at Bunker Hill Monument. And here is that amazing monument right in front of us. There's a statue of Colonel William Prescott, one of the leaders of the militia here, and around. And you look down the hills behind me, this is where roughly, I guess, that redoubt would have been at. And you have been looking this way, looking at row after row of redcoats coming up from the coastline down there and marching towards your fortifications. Pretty wild to think about, especially with all these homes and things here, but just imagining the carnage and what happened here and how bloody this battle was and what a decisive battle it really was for the Americans as well. Of course, they have the famous quote here, "Don't fire till you see the whites of their eyes." And here's the plaque, Breed's Hill, site of the Battle of Bunker Hill. Say this is quite a high drumlin. If I look straight across from me, I'm sitting about the 3rd story, 2nd to 3rd story, somewhere in there if I go straight across. So what's that, 20, 30 feet tall? And you can imagine as a soldier running up 20 or 30 foot mountain, being fired upon, and then getting attacked as you come over the redoubts and over the fortifications have been quite a harrowing experience. And you really get an idea about how steep this is here. You can see somebody running down there in the height, but also the size of one of these drumlins coming across here, these geologic features. All right, with this amazing view behind me from on top of Breed's Hill, I want to thank you all for joining me today to learn about the history of the Boston area, the history of the American Revolution, as well as learn about this historic year, the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Pretty exciting. What fascinating history here, what beautiful neighborhoods, what wonderful people. Everybody I talked to was great. Really enjoyed my time here in Boston exploring this trail with you all. So with that being said, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. Goodbye and take care. See you on the next adventure.